Well, welcome into Bayou Roar on this episode. We are going to be recapping LSU's win over Arkansas. And then I'm going to be diving into my coaching board 2.0 because, man, the coaching carousel just keeps on going. But first, we're going to talk about this game because LSU did pick up a win on Saturday over Arkansas 23-22. And look, by all means, a win is a win. I think you are always grateful for a victory over an SEC rival, even when you're not having a great year and they're not having a great year. I think you always feel a lot better when you take home a win against somebody that you just don't like very much. And obviously, this means a whole lot for the program, maybe more so than the players. It's such a weird time we live in where most of them are just coming in from the transfer portal and not from Louisiana or stuff like that. Like the battle for the boot maybe doesn't mean as much to them sometimes as it does, the fans and all those good things. But you took home the boot once again, and you feel just super happy that you walked out of a sleepy, messy game with a 1 point win. You really do. But at the same time, I mean, this was just really, really messy. I mean, really, really messy all the way around. And we'll start by talking about the defense because I think the defense kind of got picked apart a little bit unfairly by people throughout the day, just because they struggled here and there to stop you know Talon Green at times. You had some struggles, getting them off the field. They converted a couple fourth downs, 2 point conversion, all those good things. But here's the deal: when I'm looking at this Arkansas offense, Arkansas's offense has been the complete opposite of what their defense has been. While their defense has been complete garbage, their offense has actually been really, really good for the most part because Talon Green is kind of an animal. I mean, the dude is what, 6'5, 6'6", but he can also run extremely fast. He's a weapon once he escapes the pocket. And then he's a pretty decent passer as well. I don't think that's really his biggest strength, but he can get the ball down the field and do some good things from that perspective at times. And look, Talon Green had 165 yards passing with 2 interceptions. So you forced him to turn the ball over a couple times and you held him to 70 yards rushing. I mean, honestly, that's pretty good. I mean, you go back to their game against Ole Miss a little bit earlier in the season, Green threw for 305 yards, ran for 115 against Ole Miss, and they put up 35 points. Who else have they played? I mean, they put up 31 against Tennessee. They put up 42 against Texas A&M, 42 points against A&M. Green had 256 passing with 3 passing touchdowns. He also had 85 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on the day in that one. So my point being, was it a perfect day for LSU's defense? No. But in another game where your offense continued to let you down and not really back you up very much, you actually held a pretty potent, offense, or a very capable offense, I guess I should say, to, you know, under 25 points, and you held them significantly down in most areas of the game. So, it really wasn't that bad of a performance defensively. Now, Harold Perkins Jr. once again had an awesome day going out there getting an interception. He just played like his old self, it felt like again. The last 2 weeks felt like Perkins has really stepped up, and played pretty well. He had that big play against Alabama, played very well this week. In another week without Whit Weeks as well, by the way. I mean, once again, Whit Weeks was not out there for you, and you were able to go up against a really good offense and win. Like, I think that's impressive for this defense. I mean, they tried to pick on Mansour Delane at one point, and he made them pay and got an interception in the red zone. Like, there's just so many times where this defense continues to prove that they are really good. This is a 2025 college football season where offenses are better than ever, it feels like now. I mean, we talked about it, when I was previewing the season way back, in August, that man, when it came to this defense, you didn't necessarily need them to jump into like the top 10 or the top 5 of every major category to go out there and win a championship. Could you just go out and play maybe within the top 25 or maybe the top 30? And look, I mean, that's the kind of performance you saw today. If you had a much better offensive day to back up what your defense was doing, this score might have looked a lot different. You know what I'm saying? Like, and how many games could you have gone back and said, man, if the offense had maybe done a little bit more, maybe we kind of take care of some more teams a little bit more handily. But I mean, thinking about LSU's defense too over the course of this season, I know they obviously had a very bad performance against Texas A&M. They didn't do too hot against Vanderbilt. But I mean, you held that South Carolina team to 10 points and you held Lenora Sellers down to a very, very low number. That's something that Alabama was not able to do. That's not something that A&M, at least for one half, was not able to do. I mean, Lenora Sellers is a really, really great quarterback, and you made him kind of look like a pedestrian out there, the way that they played. So, again, I'm not saying this defense has been elite all year long, or I'm not trying to say that this defense, has not had their faults at times. But for the people that kind of ripped on this defense, saying, well, they're not tackling, they're not doing this and that, blah, 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 they gave up another really good effort to, this past weekend. And at this point, I mean, I can't say anything better, I think, about the LSU defense. And if I was to give a player of the game, honestly, I'm kind of I think for players of the game for both sides of the ball, I'm kind of splitting it between two people. Mansour Delane and Harold Perkins would be my two game balls that I would give to the defensive side. Because Mansour Delane not only got that pick in the red zone, he also had another play at some point later in the game where they had a chance to convert. And it would have given a lot of momentum to Arkansas. And Mansour Delane stuck with it, kind of kept fighting to the ground and forced the incompletion. That's just a play that you got to have. And then again, Perkins just playing so well that they started to fear where Perkins was. I mean, you saw on the Deshaun Spears sack at some point that they were trying to find Perkins. They were trying to find where Perkins was blitzing from. And that just allowed Spears to kind of slip in almost untouched to get the sack. Like that was the type of performance you always kind of were hoping Harold could get back to. And he did that again this past Saturday. So defensively, I know it wasn't perfect, but you had a really nice performance against a really, really solid offense. And I think you should still be proud of where this defense has been. There's still one more really big challenge left on the schedule. And obviously, that's a few weeks away in Oklahoma. But I mean, you've got to feel pretty good that they've at least gotten this defense back to a much more respectable level than where they were 2 years ago. And we had the worst defense in program history under Matt House. So, again, I know it wasn't the greatest effort maybe in the world, but it was a lot better. And it was very, very solid for the most part. So I'm actually pretty proud of how the defense played on Saturday. But then, of course, offensively is where everybody's eyes, I think, were glued to on Saturday because we found out that Nussmeier had re aggravated that abdominal injury. I'm glad that I didn't, end up. I missed our Arkansas preview episode because I went on a last second trip up to Nashville last week and I thought about recording it before I left for my trip and I'm glad I didn't because at that time we were working off of the news that it was going to be a quarterback split. And it didn't come out till much, much closer to, the game that he had re-aggravated that injury. They were going to take a look at him, and then he was officially ruled out. And so Van Buren was named the starter, and this was his first official start for the LSU Tigers. And that's where everybody was obviously looking to see, okay, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen now that you give Michael the game, you give him the keys to the offense fully? What happens? And look, I'll just go ahead and talk about Michael Van Buren since I'm sure that's what most people are going to want to listen to outside of coaching stuff, anyways. Michael Van Buren, if I was to give him a letter grade, it's really tough because it was not the worst performance in the world. But at 21 of 31 for 221 and a touchdown and 36 yards on the ground with a long of 35, I would give him a solid C plus. I mean, like a C plus that's almost on the verge of being like a B minus, like you're that close. Look, Michael Van Buren did not do anything that was like over the top, you know, mightily impressive, but he also didn't do anything that cost you the game, if that makes sense. Like, no, he did not go out there and throw for 400 yards and then have, 80 yards rushing. Like, that was not the type of game that he had. But he did enough to help you to win the game and not cost you anything at all. Now, there were some times where he took some very risky throws, and I think that's kind of the one thing is like, man, he almost could have had a couple interceptions here and there that would have really shot LSU in the foot. But again, I mean, it's not like we haven't seen Nussmeier do that this year as well, So it's like, the stuff that Van Buren did wrong, it's not like it's been like, oh, well, Nuss would never have thrown that ball. It's like, no, Nussmeier's also thrown some bad interceptions at times too. The thing is, though, I think the biggest play that Van Buren had on Saturday was that 35-yard run. I think that was probably his best play of the day because that kept that drive alive after it seemed like it was going to be a disaster. And then you were essentially able to kind of ice the game from there. Now, I think the second most impressive play that happened was the Bauer Sharp touchdown reception because you saw why Michael Van Buren's skill set is one that you would like to have in this offense. Because Van Buren had 10 rushing attempts, in this game. So he'd carried the ball a couple times. They knew he was a willing runner. And on that touchdown throw, Van Buren had kind of rolled out to the right. He had started to move up a little bit towards the line of scrimmage. And then you saw some people get baited to move up. So they started to move towards Van Buren. And that's when he pulled up and threw the pass down to Bauer Sharp. Decent ball, probably not the best throw in the world, but a good enough ball where Bauer Sharp was able to reel it in, score the touchdown, and then that puts you up for good in the game. So, all that being said, Van Buren had some nice moments, and you saw some really good things from him, just in terms of, hey, this is why that skill set is just very much so needed in this offense this year. And I'll talk about that in a second, why I'm giving it kind of that caveat. But the reason why you want his kind of skill set in this year's offense is because of the fact that they know he is a willing runner. And so you're going to get times where the defense will kind of move up like that, and that will open up something down the field. His arm is just something that he's got to continue to develop. And he certainly can. I mean, that's certainly something he can work on and improve on and get better at, over time. But it's just one of those things of, man, there were several moments in this game where if his arm was a little bit more refined, he could have had some really big throws down the field that were available and wide open. He just couldn't hit them. Now, he got in a lot, I think, better of a rhythm as the game moved along and he got more comfortable and things like that and started to settle in. I think you saw him start to get in a much better groove. But at the same time, I just think for this year there is a ceiling that this offense is always going to hit because you went up against the worst defense in the entire SEC this weekend and one of the worst defenses in the country. Arkansas's defense is not good whatsoever. And yet you only were able to muster up 23 points and you kind of struggled to do that. You still had a lot of offensive struggles on the day, even facing off against the worst defense in the country. So, or one of the worst defenses in the country, sorry. So again, it's like, yes, were there some nice things that Van Buren did in this one? Yeah. But this offense as a whole is completely capped at what they can do. And the main reason for that is this offensive line. This offensive line continues to show that they are just really, really bad. And not just bad in terms of like, when you're looking around college football. I mean, this might be one of the worst offensive lines in LSU history, if it's not the worst. And look, I know Tyree Adams is not playing, and Adams was serviceable, I felt like, at left tackle when he was in there. But I mean, really, Braylon Moore and Josh Thompson are your only two guys on this line that have been like really, really solid. And then it feels like Cohen Eccles is starting to kind of find a groove a little bit in some areas. But man, Weston Davis, I feel bad because I feel like we keep piling on to this kid. Weston Davis honestly doesn't need to be starting on the line anymore. He just doesn't. I mean, bless him. He cannot hold up on the line. He just can't. And I know Carius Kern also had his struggles, but here's the thing. Kern's a freshman. I expect him to get beaten out sometimes. That's just going to be the lumps you take. And I know Weston Davis is also a young guy as well. But the difference is like Carius Kern has shown me enough like good flashes that I'm like, hey, keep him in there. Weston Davis has not shown me that many good flashes. Like he just hasn't. He has struggled a lot. In my opinion, Ori Williams has played much better. He needs to kind of be more of your right tackle, and you still, I think, need to let Carius Kern try to go out there and play left until at least Tyree Adams is maybe healthy enough to come back and plug in from his tightrope surgery, whenever that may be. But with that being said, I don't think Carius Kern's future is at left tackle, anyways. So it's like, hey, just let him go out there and do the best that he can, kind of knowing he's probably going to end up being a guard, anyways. But at the same time, they always said that about Emory Jones, that he was going to be a guard, and it's like then he ended up playing like 3 years of right tackle. So you never know. But Carius Kern at least has shown enough promise to where you're like, okay, yeah, I feel comfortable still having him out there. Weston Davis doesn't need to touch the field unless there's an injury or something. I mean, I feel bad saying that, but it's just the ultimate truth because this offensive line is just bad. And you need to try to go out there and try to put the best five out there that you can. But Weston Davis is at this point not one of your best five whatsoever. So with all that being said, this offensive line, you know, is going to cap your offense severely because the quarterbacks just don't have time. They don't have enough time to let routes develop, let schemes develop. They don't run block well enough to allow for, a consistency to be present. So it's just one of those really difficult things of, you think this offense can get much better, but it's like I've said kind of since the coaching change happened, you're stuck with who you have. There's not like a free agent portal that you can go to and say, hey, let's sign this guy and bring him in to try to maybe help us. There's nothing like that available in college football, at least right now, where you could go out and pick up some random guy and say, hey, come in, plug in, you'll do good. There's nothing like that. You're stuck with who you have, and what you have is not very good. And so it's just that's going to be your ultimate capping. Now, I will say this. Despite the poor play of the offensive line, I mean, again, Van Buren gets a C plus because I think he did do some good things. It's just I wish, he maybe just had done a little bit better passing wise, because I do feel like he left a lot of plays out there that maybe weren't necessarily on the offensive line. It was just like he just overthrew somebody or just didn't make a good decision, and that's more so on him. Anyways, despite that though, Van Buren did decent. Your running game actually had a pretty nice day. Caden Durham, let's give him a shout out here. 12 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown, and including a long of 27. Harlem Berry, 11 for 52. Would have had a touchdown if he ran in at the end, but he made the smart decision to slide down so they could run out the rest of the clock. and you had 37 rushing attempts for 155 yards. Probably one of your best running performances of the year. And again, not surprising because even with a terrible offensive line, you once again were going up against a very, very bad Arkansas defense, and you ran the ball fairly well. Now, if I was to give, like I said, I kind of split, you know, you know, game balls for the defense. If I was to do this for the offense, I would give it to the two running backs, Durham and Barry. Like, give them a shout out in this one because they did really, really well. And honestly, I would be tempted to just give it to Durham because it's been such a long, just hard season for him where it just feels like he's never really been able to get to the level that we all thought maybe he could at the beginning of the year. Now, Harlem Berry has been a very awesome player to watch and step up. And you definitely hope with the new regime that he stays because he is a very, very talented back. But you should also hope that Durham stays because he's also very, very good back. It's just like I've mentioned before, it just seems like some of his skill sets are more dependent on actually having some pretty good blockers in front of him more so than his actual talent. Now, there's also rumors that maybe he's been a little bit more hurt than, we have been able to, I don't know, hear about, I guess is, the right way to say that. So we haven't really been disclosed that he's had an injury, but some people think that he's had an injury all year that's kind of hampered him. I don't know. Feels like that always comes out when people have been struggling. They're like, oh, he's been hurt half the year. But I'll say this as well. Xavier Thomas had 6 catches for 80 yards in this one. That definitely could have been something that could have landed him an offensive MVP for this one. But honestly, all in all, your offense is, again, just the weakest link of this team. There was one drive where Alex Atkins literally just pulled every like trick play it felt like they had in the playbook that you see on like NCAA sometimes, and you're like, what in the world is going on there? I mean, there was an entire drive where my jaw hit the floor because I was just like, I don't know what's coming next. Like, what is happening here? And so it was wild. But you saw some good things. It's just, again, this offense is your weakest part of this team. And at this point, there's just not getting any better. I mean, you'll have a good week against Western Kentucky probably next week, but then you got to go play a Brent Venables defense on the road against Oklahoma. And that's just going to be, no matter who the starting quarterback is, that's just going to be really difficult. But as we wrap up the conversation here, I think part of the biggest talking point that has made me the most frustrated coming out of the game is this merry-go-round that we're playing with the quarterbacks. Because obviously, like I said, Michael Van Buren went out there and had a fine performance. I mean, a C plus in my book that's really close to maybe being a B minus. I don't think is bad. I think that's a good performance for your first start in LSU. But the thing is, there's some Baton Rouge media people, there's some other podcasters and things like that are just running all this stuff of like, some of them are like, yes, Van Buren is the answer. He's the cure and all those things, right, for this offense. And then there's others that now see this game and they go, see, what did I tell you? Garrett Nussmeier wasn't the problem and all that, yada, yada, yada. If you've been blaming Garrett Nussmeier all year, then one, shame on you because, I mean, yes, he's not had a good season. And I agree fully he should have been benched. I'm like, not saying that he didn't, you know, need to be benched or anything like that. But Garrett Nussmeier just didn't fit this offense. I mean, I think that's the best thing you could say about this. This offense is one that needed a quarterback with a Van Buren like skill set, where even if you're not like a Lamar Jackson, a Jalen Milrow type runner, you can at least move around on your feet good enough to maybe escape for 10, 11 yards every now and again, even 5 to 6 every now and again, and still be able to throw the ball down the field a little ways. Like, that was the type of quarterback that this offense really needed this year because of how poorly the offensive line played. I think that's why we're seeing such a tale between last year and this year for Nussmeier. Because last year you had an offensive line that, yeah, maybe because of the offense, they didn't run block very well, but holy smokes, could they pass block because that's a little bit simpler for them, instead of whatever running schemes they were trying. And they were able to hold up very, very well. So that gave Nussmeier the time he needed to throw the ball down the field. I mean, and then you go to this year and you have an offensive line that's just, I mean, could let me walk right through, basically, and at least wave at Garrett Nussmeier a little bit and put the pressure on him. And like he started to freak out. Now, obviously, I think he's been playing hurt longer than what we all knew, for the majority of the year. But all that being said, it's like if you were blaming all of it on Nussmeier, then like that's a shame on you. Like, don't blame that kid for the fact that he just didn't fit this offense. He just didn't fit this offense. I know the expectations were all there. We all, I think, had them as LSU fans. I know I did, that Nussmeier would come back in and do really well. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's just when you have no time and you're a pocket passer. I mean, what were you really expected to do? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to blame him for everything. But what I will say is this: for all the media people that are now like, but see, Van Buren wasn't the answer because he didn't really do that great on Saturday. It's like, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best performance in the world, but he made plays that just Nussmeier couldn't. And if you're trying to argue that Nussmeier, if he's feeling better by next week or whatever, should come back in, it's like, no. At this point, just let Van Buren be the quarterback the rest of the season. Let him try to get some reps under his belt because a lot of these guys, I think, are just assuming that Van Buren's just going to blow it up and leave, at the end of the year. It's like, well, what if he doesn't? Would you rather play Nussmeier, who's done after this year and can't physically come back for another season and, is only really here at this point to finish out his senior year and maybe have a shot at the NFL if that dream even still exists for him at this point? Or would you rather play the guy that potentially could come back? And even if you didn't play him the last two games, there's still a chance that he leaves. So if he's potentially going to leave anyways, let him play. Because what if he stays? You got a guy that then played a couple games as a starter, including a road start against Oklahoma, and you got that guy coming back, or you play him, he can't take his red shirt, and then he goes somewhere else. And, we're all acting like Van Buren is apparently going to be the number one pick in, a couple years down the road draft. Who knows? He may not be. Like it's just one of those frustrating things of like it feels like there's so many different arguments as to why they should not play Van Buren right now, whether it's trying to save the stupid red shirt, which that argument doesn't hold any water with me because it just doesn't matter. If he redshirts this year, guess what? He can leave after next year. Like I don't think anybody realizes that, apparently. If he redshirts in his or in his true sophomore season, he can leave after next year if he has a really nice year. I mean, what did that save you? And if he doesn't redshirt, he's a junior next year. Like, congratulations. He could still leave if he has a really good next year. That argument holds no water with me. Also, the argument of just, well, Nuss, he's a fifth year senior and all that. Yeah, he's also hurt. He re aggravated his injury again, an injury, and he just looks so defeated right now. I think you just need to, for all sakes and purposes, just let him rest. Let him rest. Let him sit. Just let him be a good teammate. Let him get to the end of the year. Just don't push him. Now, I think maybe if you got him some reps towards the end of next week's game against Western Kentucky, with it being senior night and all that, that's fine. I think that's all fine and well. But I think Van Buren should be your starter for the rest of the year just because his skill set, even if it's not popping these elite numbers, like all of these Michael Van Buren haters, even if they're not saying they are a hater, are trying to point out that, oh, his stats weren't that good. Okay, they may not have been, but he also did some stuff out there this past weekend that Nussmeier just can't at this point. And so you need him, I think, the rest of the way moving forward. But all in all, you did what you had to do. You got to win. You're bowl eligible once again. You should beat Western Kentucky next week, which means you'll have 7 wins. And if you make it to your bowl game and win, it could end up being an 8-win season for you, which, all things considered, I think would kind of be a saving grace for this year. But nonetheless, you hadn't won since South Carolina. So this was a huge win. I think for just everybody, it's a big boost for Frank Wilson, which I didn't know this, but Frank Wilson is the first African American coach for LSU to ever get a victory as even as the interim head man for the university. So that's really cool that, some history was made on Saturday in Tiger Stadium. But again, you brought back home the boot, which is always, or it's actually, I think, staying home, so really, really good stuff from LSU this past weekend in terms of what was played on the field. But of course, the coaching carousel just keeps marching along as well. So I've got some thoughts about that I'm going to share. So now we're moving into our coaching board section of the podcast that I didn't even think we were really going to talk about on this one. But then, man, just some crazy stuff happened this weekend. And here we are now having this conversation where I'm going to be sharing my updated coaching list with you all on this one. But I have to start, obviously, with Lane Kiffin talk because, reports are now coming out. If you've been living under a rock, man, you missed a lot because the Kiffin family has been doing some traveling. Not necessarily Lane Kiffin himself, but his ex-wife, his children, a couple other family members have both now traveled to Gainesville, Florida to do some visits out there, but also now to Baton Rouge to do some visits there. And a lot of this, I think, has been accelerated because Ole Miss has come out now and said, hey, we need you to make a decision on what you are going to do before the Egg Bowl. Like, they pretty much put it on the table for him now, an ultimatum of, you got to decide what you're doing before the Egg Bowl. And so now these schools that really want him, as you can tell, are trying whatever methods they need to do to get him to go to their school. And look, I don't think Lane's going on these visits because it would probably break like rules and violations and all that. But obviously, the families play a big part of that. And you would be a fool if you weren't thinking Jimmy Sexton, his agent, is not also involved with these talks and conversations and visits in some way or another, too. It's all definitely funneling right now through those different channels. But obviously, the family visits mean a lot, especially to Kiffin over the last couple of years that has tried to reconnect, with his ex-wife and things like that, try to have a good relationship with his family, all those good things, right? So we know that the family's going to play a big role into where he's going. But it's just crazy because you have this weird now triangle where you've got the Ole Miss extension up here that would make him the highest paid coach probably in college football. He loves Ole Miss. He's talked about how much Ole Miss has meant to him and things like that. Like, he's had a lot of success at Ole Miss, and in the NIL era, he can continue to probably have it. So you got that. Then you've got Florida, where he is a Spurrier diehard. He loves Spurrier. He, he looks up to him a lot. I mean, Gainesville and Florida, like, when things are aligned properly, Florida is a really good job. It is. Like, we don't think about it like that because of what Sunbelt Billy did the last couple years, but when things are all clicking the way they need to, Florida can be a really good situation for a coach. It can be. So, like, Florida's on the table, and like, he loves Spurrier and all that. Like, he might really want to go there. Florida also, after they failed with Billy Napier, taking kind of a riskier chance, may be willing to more so put out the money to try to get more of a quote unquote guaranteed thing with Kiffin. So you got that. And then you got LSU over on this side where it's like, okay, there's not maybe as many connections to Kiffin, but you've got a team that just fired a coach. They've proven that they're willing to pour the resources into the program. Historically, you've had three different head coaches since the year 2000 win a national championship and compete for another one, and has since the year 2000 been a very successful program, producing a lot of players into the NFL, got a great recruiting base, all those things, right? So it's not like LSU's just over in, this corner going, well, we don't really have a fight compared to these other two parts of the triangle, right? LSU's got its own weight in this battle. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, Kiffin's got to make a decision. And I know this is probably going to get me into some hot water. I'm probably one of the few LSU fans that is saying I don't really want Kiffin to be the next head coach of LSU. And before you turn it off, before you click off of this or whatever, just at least give me a minute to explain why. Because with Kiffin, there's just this weird thing that follows him. And it's weird to me that every time there's a job opening, no matter if it's Penn State, Florida, the Tennessee Titans, the New York Giants, whatever. It's like the first name on everybody's list is always Lane Kiffin. When Auburn opened last year was let's go out and get Kiffin. There's just a weird thing to me when you're chasing after a coach that at so many times throughout his career has proven that he is a good coach, but not like an elite level coach. That just makes me really weary. I get some of it was not great situations. Like he should probably never have been the head coach of the, you know, Las Vegas Raiders or the Oakland Raiders when he was there. But he was, and that did not work out well. And then at Tennessee, he had some success, but it wasn't like this overwhelming success. And it was okay. But then he left them in the middle of the night, basically, to go to USC. And then USC was okay, but not great either. And then goes to Bama, Florida Atlantic, all this stuff goes and eventually lands himself at Ole Miss. And to be fair, over the last like 5 years, he has done some really good things at Ole Miss. He's really turned them around for the better, I feel like, in a lot of ways. And that's probably what a lot more people are judging this off. And I can agree to the statement that the Lane Kiffin of today is a lot different than the Lane Kiffin of like 5 years ago. But there's still this arrogance and there's still this ego with Lane Kiffin that makes me want to stay away with it from him with like a 20-foot pole. And look, I know a lot of people are like, well, I mean, the swagger could work, it'd be great, like, and all that. It could, but here's the thing. The one kind of common thread that I've seen from a lot of, alumni on Twitter, some fans on social media, podcasters, media outlets, things like that. Kind of the one common thread that a lot of people have said is, hey, we need somebody to come in that will like embrace LSU and embrace the people of Louisiana, which is such a different state as compared to other states across the country, with a rich history, a different type of history, stuff like that. To embrace not just the school of LSU, but the culture and all those things, which I've said before on this podcast. It's hard to explain to somebody what we mean by that, but it's just there's something different here that doesn't exist other places. And you've got to be able to embody that and embrace that and maximize that. And I just don't know if a guy like Kiffin can really do that because he makes so many things all about himself. I mean, he's out there smack talking players. He's out there celebrating like that his plays worked and for first downs and all this stuff. Like I don't know. There's just something about him, and like he whines and moans about stuff like LSU getting night games over Ole Miss and stuff like that. Just even as of recently, this was not like 6 or 7 years ago. This was like just within the last 2 years, he has complained about teams getting night games, and poor Ole Miss doesn't get one because their 65,000 stadium is not, this premier nighttime environment and stuff like that. Like he complains about stuff like that constantly. And it's like, you really want him? Because listen, I'll give him his credit where credit's due. He's probably one of the best, if not the best, offensive mind in college football. Maybe one of the best, if not the best, offensive mind throughout the history of college football. He is really great when it comes to that. But he's not ever gotten close to a national championship. He's never even sniffed it. Les Miles, Les Miles with his archaic, ancient offenses made it to 2 championship games and won one of them. Ed Orgeron, who didn't even coach offense, let like an aging Steve Ensminger call it, got a championship with one of the best offenses college football's ever seen. So like I think we would agree, right, that like, you know, coach is probably not seen in the same light or the same level as Kiffin have won at LSU. So obviously like he could propel himself forward, but at the same time, Les embraced LSU, kind of gave himself up to the program, kind of always tried to do up until the end at least what was best for LSU. Orgeron literally would have bled out and died for LSU if he had to. Like, there's just something about that I don't think Kiffin is willing to do. I think he wants it to be about himself. And yeah, he could have some success here, but it's not like he's this top flight recruiter. I know that, Ole Miss and LSU recruiting grounds are a lot different, but it's not like he's ever been this super top notch recruiter, no matter where he's been. He just hasn't. He's not known as that. He's literally known for being a really great offensive mind, and he still makes a lot of moronic decisions as a head coach, even now. I mean, against Oklahoma not too long ago, he went for it on a fourth down and a terrible decision. And if Oklahoma had been able to capitalize, it could have swung the momentum of that game. He was just lucky it didn't come back to bite him. But that's the thing. He still has these tendencies to do some really stupid stuff. And I just don't know if like that's the type of guy that I'm out here saying we need to go pay him the most money in college football. If he was maybe cheaper than what Brian Kelly was, yeah, sure. Maybe roll the dice on him. I would feel a little bit. The fact that you're talking about paying him the most money to be the highest paid college football coach at LSU, I just don't feel comfortable with that because I don't think he's like the best coach in college football. I just don't. So that's why I just, there's this weird sense of uncomfortableness that follows me around when I'm thinking about Lane Kiffin. And look, part of this, I get it. It's me just, I don't like him a whole lot. I just don't. I never really have. But I think the other part of this is I just don't think if you're going to roll the dice on somebody that hasn't really had a chance to prove that they can make it to the mountaintop, I don't think you should pay them the most money to be the highest paid coach in college football. And the other thing is, I mean, you talk about, well, he's matured and all that stuff. Okay, great. Well, look at what he's doing right now. He's playing this game with Ole Miss where he's got an extension on the table to get him his money in a place that he says he loves. And yeah, he's playing this game with them, fanning these flames everywhere, creating this giant forest fire right now of, well, what is he doing? Is he going to stay? I mean, they're having the best season of all time. If he signed that extension and never got back to the playoffs again, they'd build a statue of him outside of Vaught Hemingway because of what he's done this year. There's just an uncomfortableness with me with Kiffin, and I just don't think that will ever subside. And so I don't want him as the LSU head coach. I might be the only LSU fan on that hill, and that's okay. But there just seems to me to be this be careful what you wish for kind of aura that surrounds him. Because again, I think it's weird that every time a coaching position comes open, he's the first name that gets thrown out, as if he's the best thing since sliced bread. And I just don't think he is. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he'd do great. Maybe he wins an Addy. I don't know. I just don't. I think you're going to end up regretting that decision if you sign him. I also just don't think it's likely though, because I think the price tag's way too high. I do. Now, supposedly they're willing to pay the price tag for him and only him, but I just think you're going to end up regretting it. But let's go to the coaching list now, though, because I could probably go on about that forever. I have 3 categories on the coaching list: still unlikely, not happening, and who I actually want for the job. And we'll start with the still unlikely. And the first name I have up on here is Nick Saban. A couple weeks ago, the odds got updated. He was now the betting favorite to become the new LSU head coach. Kind of got shifted around again, and I think for good reason. I think Saban's been in talks with the athletic department and stuff like that, but I don't think it's any kind of traction towards him becoming the new coach. I think this era of college football just doesn't fit him anymore. I don't think he likes it from a coaching standpoint, at least. I think he's done. I think he likes what he's doing at ESPN. I think he stays retired. Next up, Joe Brady. Look, Joe Brady's an awesome offensive coordinator right now in the NFL, and that's great. Super happy for him. He's an NFL guy. I think he loved the one season he was at LSU, but this has got to stop. This whole train of him coming back has got to stop because he did not like recruiting. He didn't really want to do it. The first opportunity he got to go back to the NFL, he ran to it. He was only at LSU for 1 year. I think people forget about that. But Brady's not happening. Brady, I just don't think I think it's very, very unlikely that he comes back. Same thing with Brent Key and Clark Lee. I think a couple years ago, they absolutely run from Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech to come to Baton Rouge. I just don't think with the current positions they're both in that they leave their programs, especially their alma maters, to go take a job at LSU. I just don't. I think that at this point, they both, like for Brent Key, he's got a path potentially to the playoff every year that's pretty comfortable in the ACC. I don't think he would give that up. I think Clark Lee, while he's very, very good, I just think in this day and age, he can be competitive at Vanderbilt with NIL and transfer portal and all that stuff. And he is at a place that he really loves. So, again, I think just because of the state of the era we're in, I think both of those guys stay. Next up is Marcus Freeman. Now, look, Marcus Freeman, you talk about a big name. And what I would say to explain my point again about Kiffin, the weird aura that follows Kiffin with me is not the same type of aura that follows Marcus Freeman for me. Because, yes, it would be weird to go back to Notre Dame and get their coach a second time, like, and all that. But Marcus Freeman, he played, and I think he's very much more of a player's coach than Kelly was. He's got an identity with the defensive side of the football. I think he's proven that he's bought into the program because, look, he's not a Notre Dame guy. He was an Ohio State player. But he's bought into Notre Dame, and he's proven that he can plug into the program, be selfless, and do a really good job. And he just played in the national championship. Like, he's gotten too near the pinnacle of the sport and just fell a little bit short. Marcus Freeman, I think, would be a great hire. The problem is I just don't think they're going to go out and get him. I think they're only going to be willing to pay the big price tag again for Kiffin. And I think that's going to keep you off the board and off the radar of Marcus Freeman just from that aspect. But I also think Freeman is a guy that, man, I think he might just stay at Notre Dame until at some point in time the Ohio State job possibly opens up. And then I think he'd go running back there. Now, of course, that would take Ryan Day retiring, quitting, um, getting fired, or just deciding to go to the NFL or something. But I think Freeman would run to that job if it became available. So, no, I don't think they're going out and getting Marcus Freeman. But that is a name that I don't hate because I think he's the opposite of Kiffin. I think he buys into the program. I think he embraces where he's at, and I think he'd be great. But I just don't think it's going to happen. Same with Ed Orgeron. That's just something I don't think is going to happen. I know there was a lot of talks about him coming back. It's like people forget that the last 2 years of his run there were not very good, and not just from the on the field perspective, but from the off the field chaos. It wasn't great. And look, time can heal for sure. And by all means, Ed O may be ready to come back, play and coach really well. Sorry, not play, coach really well again. Maybe those competitive juices are back to what they used to be. And maybe he wisens up from the poor decisions he made at the end of his tenure here the first time. I just don't know if LSU, under their current leadership, is going to be willing to roll the dice on Coach O again. I just don't know if that's going to be the case. And so, as much as O fits, obviously, LSU like a glove, I just don't think it happens. So, that is another name I think we can cross off the list pretty firmly. As or get close to crossing it off. I would never say never with O, but it's just unlikely. But there are names that are for sure not happening anymore for various reasons. And so I'll read those off to you now. The first names up here, Jeff Brom and Kurt Signetti. That is because they have both signed extensions with their current schools for long term. So they are definitely not coming to Baton Rouge. That is a definite. Now, Dan Lanning is another guy that's been floated out there. He's been pretty adamant that he is staying at Oregon. And while sometimes coaches will do that, they'll kind of fluff that all up and stuff like that. I think for Dan Lanning, the difference is the situation he's in is really, really good. You got the Nike money, you've got everybody kind of bought in. He's been doing really good, a great path to competing for the playoff every year in the Big Ten. I think Lanning stays right where he is, at least for right now. And I think he stays put. And then the last name is Eli Drinkwitz from Missouri. And look, again, I think this is more of like a, hey, I know he's had some success, but here's the thing. Drinkwitz, like, he's a kind of an odd dude. I don't think he would fit in personality wise here. Also, like for Drinkwitz, I think his price tag is going to be a little too high. Again, if you're only going to be paying for Kiffin as the top candidate that you're going to be willing to break the bank out for, then you're not going to go sign Drinkwitz. It's just not going to happen. Like, that's a name that I just don't think he's proven enough, you know, over his career where you say, yeah, that's a dude I'm going to go out and spend 11, 12 million dollars on. And and that's just one of those things of, I think that's kind of what makes it a done deal for LSU in terms of the Drinkwitz, situation, is because he's already at 9 million on his current deal at Missouri. And I think that's just going to be a little bit too rich for LSU's blood. So that's just something that I don't think is going to happen. Now, there are coaches that I do think they should go after and chase after. And the top dog on my list is Kelvin Shepard. And look, that is very biased of me. I love Shep because of what he did when he was a player here. But that's the thing. I think you have alumni coming out of the backwoods just protesting for him right now to be the next coach because they believe in him. They believe that he knows what it takes because he's seen what it takes to be successful here. Talk about a guy that's going to buy in for his alma mater. Shepard is going to do that. Shepard is absolutely 100% going to do that. You talk about connecting with kids. in a very different era of college football, Shepard played at the highest level and he coached at the highest level. You don't think they're going to respect him knowing that he knows where they're coming from and he's been at this university before? Like, heck yeah, they're going to buy in for that guy. I know there's some people that are really nervous because, well, he's never been a head coach and he's never recruited at college and stuff like that. Like, okay, he's been recruited. He knows what it's like to be recruited. Like, he'll figure that out. And look, listen, who cares if you've never been a head coach before? Like, who cares? Dan Lanning wasn't a head coach before taking the Oregon job. Kirby Smart wasn't a head coach before going to Georgia. I think that worked out pretty well for them. Like, this whole narrative that we just have to go over guys that have coached as a head coach before, we're eventually going to run out of coaches. I don't know if you realize that or not. We're going to run out of coaches. James Franklin, I forgot to mention him in the not happening section. He's not happening because he just got signed by Virginia Tech. All right. Well, that's a guy with experience that's now taken off the board. Like, eventually you're running out of guys that you can actively say have a lot of experience, have done really well, yada, yada, yada. Eventually you got to roll the dice on somebody. Why not take a roll of the dice on Kelvin Shepard? You talk about money. You don't think Shepard would come here on a cheaper deal than Lane Kiffin, Drinkwitz, maybe even some of these other guys that we're going to talk about here in just a second? I think he would. I think he'd take a little bit of a discount as a first time head coach. Maybe a deal with some incentives, stuff like that, that you are really pushing for, at least your governor's pushing for. I think Shepard would do it. And I think Shepard would do a great job. You just have to put together a really great offensive staff, keep Frank Wilson, keep Corey Raymond, who know how to recruit really well, and just let him figure it out and ride. It's not, I think, what everybody wants, but I think it would work. I do. And look, maybe I'm crazy, but I just think it would work. So, all that being said, Kelvin Shepard is a guy that I am backing 1000% for this job. And I'm backing up these other guys too on my list because obviously it's my list. I'm going to do that, but I really do believe in Kelvin Shepard. Now, Kenny Dillingham is also on my list here. And obviously, Dillingham is a popular name because he's a young coach and he's having some success right now. Just had Cam Scatabo go to the league. Like, he's been doing some good work at Arizona State. But here's the thing that I think attracts me to Kenny Dillingham the most as the potential next head coach for LSU. One, he's got a really good offensive identity. You know what you're going to kind of get from him in terms of that. Two, he took an Arizona State team last year, kind of surprisingly, to the playoff and competed and had a good run. And then, probably the most important factor in all this, I mean, the dude is bought in at Arizona State. Now, I think that was his, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he's an Arizona State alumni, so that probably helps a little bit. But man, he is dedicated to making Arizona State the best they can be. And I mean, you get that kind of attitude, you get that kind of hard worker into LSU. Yeah, he may not understand everything about LSU walking in through the door, but he'll figure it out really quickly. And he'll take the time and he'll spend the time to make sure LSU's as good as it possibly can be. So, yeah, Dillingham may be young and he may not be from Louisiana. He may not have a lot of ties here, but I think he could come in and do a really, really good job. And I think he's a guy that I would definitely feel comfortable saying I would like him to be the next head coach for LSU. I really would. And I think that's just something that goes, unstated that, you know, Dillingham, I think, would work out well here. Now, the last guy I have on, well, not the last guy, but kind of the last bigger name, quote unquote, I guess, in my mind. And then the other kind of guys are guys I would like to see called, but just maybe aren't my top three favorites. My third guy here is Matt Campbell. Now, Matt Campbell doesn't get talked about a whole lot. He doesn't. He is the head coach currently over at Iowa State. And man, let me tell you, I know what you're saying. Iowa State. But listen to the run he's had at Iowa State since taking over in 2016. 3-9, but then 8-5 with a win in the Liberty Bowl, 8-5, 7-6, 9-3 with a win in the Fiesta Bowl, 7-6, 4-8, 7-6, 11-3 in 2024, and then currently like 6-4, I believe. So yeah, it's been a little bit up and down, but imagine what a guy like Matt Campbell could do. A guy that's, by the way, he's 45 years old. Give him resources at LSU, give him better players for sure than what he's having over at, you know, Iowa State right now. And by the way, what did I say Iowa State is this year so far? 6-4. Guess who's also 6-4? You're fighting Tigers of LSU. The best case scenario for LSU is at this point going to an 8-win season with a bowl game victory. I mean, that's kind of the same circle he's in there at Iowa State. Like, and again, that's with Iowa State resources and talent. That's the whole point I'm trying to make here, basically. And look, Campbell is a very highly regarded guy, too. There is a lot of people nationally that are like, I don't understand why Matt Campbell does not get talked about more than what he does. Because the dude has been a very solid coach. And again, has kind of maxed out what he could do at Iowa State. I think the ceiling for Campbell is very high. Now, I think there's definitely some bigger risks with him than some others, but I do believe that Campbell could do a really good job with a really good program. I mean, if he landed at Penn State, I think that'd be a home run hire for them. And again, I know Iowa State doesn't pop your eyes open, but remember, where did Les Miles come from? Oklahoma State. Where did Nick Saban, the greatest college coach of all time, come from before he got to LSU? Michigan State. Sometimes these guys come from the strangest of places, but they work out. I think Campbell would come in, buy in, do a really good job. So Matt Campbell's kind of more of a sleeper on the list, I guess. He's not the big name guy that everybody's looking at, but I think Matt Campbell could come in here and do a really good job. So I'll throw him out as well. Now, those are kind of my top three. John Sumrall is another name that, like, I would be okay if they roll the dice on. I think he's a little bit more shading to unlikely at this point because I think he's either going to go to Auburn or potentially if Kiffin goes to Florida or something like that. I think he probably would maybe take the job at Ole Miss. I don't know. I feel like Sumrall is in a weird spot now where I think he's very, very shading towards unlikely for LSU. But again, the Tulane coach, he's been in Louisiana. I think there's some good stuff there that LSU could work with. I also think Alex Galesh at South Florida is a guy that hasn't really been talked about a lot, but like I think he's done some good stuff with South Florida over the last couple years. And again, take a guy like that that's kind of got a little bit of an edge and a little bit, of a chip on his shoulder, put him into a better environment with more resources. Maybe he could do something really good here. So I think he could be a guy. And then Glenn Schumann's been on my list before, the defense coordinator for Georgia. But he's a guy that I think, I haven't even heard if he's really even being looked at seriously by a lot of people. But again, he's coming from the Kirby tree. Like, I know he's really young at 35, but like that's a guy that you could roll the dice on and he could be really good. So, all that being said, my top three are obviously Shepard, Dillingham, and Matt Campbell. I think those are the guys that you should go after. Now, when it comes to Lane Kiffin, I guess I didn't really put him in a category or shade him into a category. If I was to be completely honest, I do think it's kind of an even split between LSU and Florida for him. I've been saying that I felt like he would stay at Ole Miss if they were to offer him the contract, but obviously they have, and he has not signed it, which makes me think he's leaning a little bit more towards leaving. But here's, I think, the ultimate kicker. At the end of the day, I think Kiffin wants to go to a place where he's going to get paid a lot of money. The expectations may not be necessarily as high. I don't know if Kiffin really cares about winning. I just don't. I think he likes that for the sake of his ego, but I don't know if that's really what drives him, if that makes sense. And I think he just saw what happened with Brian Kelly and the expectations that were lofted on him. And I think he runs the Florida because, man, if you get Florida to 9 or 10 wins a season, I think just having Kiffin for them would fuel their ego. And I think they'd be kind of happy with that, getting back to competitiveness again under Kiffin. So, all that being said, I think Kiffin probably is more of a lean towards Florida. But I just think at the end of the day, man, I would really love Kiffin, though, to stay at Ole Miss. Yes, it would suck because Ole Miss has been a pain in our side for a couple years now, but I just think he's done such a good job there. I think it's fun to have Ole Miss kind of in the mix. I know a lot of fans out there may not think that, but like from a big view, from a overhead view, I think it's more fun when there's a lot of teams that are kind of in the mix and we don't just have punching bags everywhere. Because trust me, it won't take very long after Kiffin leaves for Ole Miss to kind of go back down a little bit. So, with all that being said, I'm leaning towards Kiffin probably going to Florida a little bit more. But man, I kind of do hope he stays at Ole Miss just a little bit. But with that being said, that is my coaching board 2.0. Obviously, let me know what you guys think at Bayou Roar podcast on Instagram and on Twitter. Come hit us up. Love to talk to you about it there. Let me know what you guys think, for what you guys want for the next coach. And I hope you guys have a great week. We'll hopefully be back at the end of the week to actually preview Western Kentucky. It's been a while since I feel like we've gotten to do a preview pod, but we'll talk about what's coming up for Western Kentucky and for the big matchups of this weekend. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And as always, let's go Tigers.